Hello, everyone. Welcome to this evening's Commonwealth Club World Affairs program. So great to see you all here. I'm Kristen Z. I'm a news anchor at ABC 7 News in the Bay Area. Tonight, we'll be talking with the new president of the UC system, James B. Milliken. Just a few reminders for all of you before we start. Tonight's program is being recorded, so we ask that you please silence your phones for the duration of the program. And you can do that now. Also, if you have any questions for the president, please write them on the cards that were on your seats, or if you're joining us online through the YouTube chat. All right, and a big thanks to the Travers Family Foundation for sponsoring tonight's program. All right, now let's talk a little bit about the speaker. Our esteemed speaker tonight, James B. Milliken, became University of California's 22nd president last August. President Milliken oversees UC's world-renowned system of 10 campuses, 6 academic health centers, 3 affiliated national labs, more than 300,000 students, and 230,000 faculty and staff members. President Milliken has more than 3 decades of experience leading large institutions. Most recently, he served as chancellor of the University of Texas system from 2018 to 2025, where he also held the Lee Hage and Joseph D. Jamail Regents Chair in Higher Education Leadership. Now, please warmly welcome President James B. Milliken. President Milliken, welcome to California.
Thank you.
How are we treating you so far?
It's been quite a honeymoon.
Right? Dare I ask for the details?
I would like to tell you.
My name is Carmen Lee, and I work for you, Mr. President, as a bus driver at UCSF. I used to be homeless, and because you refused to help UC's lowest paid workers with housing at UCSF, I'm terrified of being homeless again, especially at retirement age. You don't have a problem giving loans to those of your highest paid workers, but you refuse to give it to the workers who need it the most. I'm one paycheck from sleeping on the street, and you have the power to do something about it.
At the UC Regents meetings,
yes,
people do express their views, and there are some real issues and challenges facing the system, including affordability for students and housing. And also, I do know you're in the middle of contract talks, so those are all things that I know you're wrestling with, and there are concerns on many different sides. But for now, I want to get back to the start of this, because
you're going to welcome me to California again?
I was going to welcome you to California, but
okay. All right.
As you know, we have opinions here, strong ones, and we're not afraid to express them in California, and that is California. I was going to start with something even more controversial, but I don't know whether I can top that. However, I have to ask you, you've been here for a few months now, which UC is the best campus? Careful now.
Yeah. Well, I'm torn because the person interviewing me is a Cal Bear, and so probably controls some of my destiny tonight. But the chair of my board is a UCLA Bruin, so I love all my children.
Okay.
9 mascots, 10 great institutions.
I see why you're in this role. Very diplomatic. Okay, I appreciate that. But I want to hear a little bit about what brought you to UC and to California, because you had sort of a untraditional path, first just into higher ed leadership, and then to California. Talk to us about that a little bit.
Yes, well, I've been doing this a long time, and you ask why I'd come to California now, because you can tell I'm old, and as one of my children said, when we discussed whether we would leave Texas and come to California, maybe you should just retire. And I thought, well, that's probably pretty good advice. But I've spent 30-some years in higher education across the country, 5 places now. Every place I've been, I have known about the University of California. Everyone does. It's one of the things I would like Californians to know about the university, that in 49 other states, there is no question about what the leading public university in America is. It's the University of California. You know, I was going to mention this later, but while I'm thinking about it, I'm going to say it now. I saw some polling the other day, had some startling responses in it. One was that many Californians think the University of California is about like every other state university. It's just so not true. They think that most of the students, many of the people that responded think many of the students are not from California. It's about 90% of our undergraduates. And they don't know enough about the value proposition. And so that part of my job, that's on me, to help people understand what the cost is, what's done to make it affordable, what the access opportunities are, what the opportunities for success are in launching careers.
Let's talk more about that in a little bit, but I want to ask you what you see the mission of the system is today.
Yeah. I'm going to go back to your other question and then answer this one, if you'll allow me to.
Sure.
Okay. So why
Only because
UC
you did not
right
say
now,
UCLA
it is a
is
great place, and everybody knows that. Yeah. It is a great place, and everybody knows it. But in fact, it is, in some ways, I think, the most important university in history. It is by far the largest in terms of its resources, its budget, its research enterprise, its impact on the world. But this is a unique time in our history. It could be the time when the University of California and other universities in America are under one of the greatest threats they've ever seen. And while friends of mine thought it's a little risky to go to California right now, I thought this is exactly the moment to be here. That this university, which has meant so much to this country and the world, not to mention to California, is under threat. And it's so important that it not only survive, but it thrive and continue to do the kinds of things that it's done so well for 157 years. So this was a rare opportunity to be able to be at a place this important at what is a really important time in its history. And I just hope I don't mess it up.
You want to be in the room where it happens, right?
Yeah.
And UC is absolutely that gigantic room.
Okay, now you want me to talk about the mission?
We do have a mission, and I wonder if you see it as something that evolves over time, and at this point in time, whether things need to refocus a little bit.
Well, it's interesting. I've read one of the things about moving around and doing these kinds of jobs in different places is the opportunity to learn about new places and the history of the university and the history of the state. So I've been doing a lot of reading about California and the origins of the University of California. And in some ways, yes, there's great difference now in terms of the technology, the scale, the research. But in some ways, the mission stays the same, and the reasons for the creation of the university are still underlie the reasons for its existence. So what has driven me throughout my career, the sort of notion that talent is universal, that it exists everywhere without regard to zip code, race, gender, ethnicity, national origin, anything, but opportunity is not. And that has unfortunately been a stubborn fact that still exists today. And so one of the most important things we can do at the University of California, or any university in this country, and public universities in particular are I think the best engines of social mobility and economic mobility, is to match that talent with opportunity. And so there are lots of programs, maybe we'll talk about some tonight, but where California excels at providing the kinds of opportunity to people who otherwise wouldn't have it and are able to use their talent and maximize their opportunities in life.
It sounds like you feel like, despite the political winds, inclusion and expanding folks who can receive the opportunities of the UC education are still very much goals for you as you lead this institution now.
Absolutely. We exist to offer opportunity to all Californians, and to some non-Californians, but
only a certain percentage as dictated by California
exactly
law.
right. But mostly for Californians and from all areas of the state, all walks of life, to have an opportunity to get the highest quality education available today.
So that's what brought you here to California. But you come at a time when confidence, I think, and trust in higher education has fallen significantly in recent years, and polls show that. Why do you think that is?
It's a tough question, and one of the things that people aren't aware of, I think, is that pre the current administration, pre the protests that followed the invasion of Israel, confidence had already dropped. In 2023, Gallup reported that confidence in higher education in America dropped 20 percentage points in 9 years, the greatest in the history of the time measuring that.
And what do you think is driving that? Is it more of a ideological battle? There are some who feel like campuses tend to lean a little left, and that plays out in ways that certain segments are perhaps not in favor of. And then there's the practical, I suppose, when you talk about who can access higher education, affordability, and is it still worth it in the sense that you're getting your return on your money and your investment? So do you think it's those things and more, perhaps?
I think you've covered a number of them already.
Oh, we can go home now.
I do think it is the idea of the cost. I was debating this with somebody in New York recently who was talking about the need to change the cost model for higher education and referring to tuition at $100,000. I said, well, wait a minute. Tuition at the University of California is $14,000. So people need to understand the value proposition, I think, of public higher education. But cost is certainly one of the factors that results in this loss of confidence. And I think in part that's because people read that certain institutions are $100,000 in tuition or more. They also think about the debt load that people leave with, which in fact is much lower in California, University of California graduates, than the national average for public universities. So we have a good story to tell in a number of these areas when we get a chance to tell the story, but people are concerned about the relevancy of courses as they see it, the need for a four-year degree.
Yeah. You know, I was reminded of, there was a student here earlier who talked about housing and talked about affordability. I think that is a challenge still for a lot of students, especially for middle-class families, right? Because there, as you said, the tuition is certainly a lot lower than private schools, but a lot of the private institutions can also waive tuition and fees altogether for those who make under a certain amount. It seems like here in California, the lowest is covered. And the highest, of course, doesn't have an issue. But for middle-class family, when you talk about a total bill of $40,000, that can still be very challenging to manage. And I don't know if you're thinking of ways to tackle that.
Sure, there is a middle-class scholarship program that the legislature and the governor initiated some years ago, which we think is really important. But I want to go back to the starting point where you talked about what some wealthy private universities are able to do. Mm-hmm. One of the things I want Californians to know is that 65% of the California undergraduates at UC campuses pay zero tuition. So there are still other costs of attendance. Housing is a particular challenge, especially in some of our communities where the universities are located. But we have done more as a state, and I say we, taking absolutely zero credit for it, but we have done more as a state to address affordability than almost any place. And I've spent my career on programs like free tuition for families at a certain income level. Mm-hmm. And I'm impressed by what California has been able to do.
What do you think UC does particularly well to support students from a financial standpoint, in addition to just covering, for example, housing and tuition and fees? Are there other ways to support them? And also, how could you expand upon that? How can you do even better as a system?
Well, we're working on that all the time, and with our partners in the legislature in part, but also through philanthropy. So we've initiated different programs to support eradicating hunger, to support discounted housing, as you mentioned, support counseling and career services, everything the kind of services that students need to graduate and to be successful.
Mm-hmm. I want to get to the other piece of what we started to talk about in terms of the falling confidence, right? And if any of that is related to the political winds that may be blowing. In that sense, how do you see UC and other universities restoring that confidence and overcoming any skepticism of whether the viewpoints are diverse and balanced and represented on all the campuses?
I think the way that we address the confidence issue is there are multiple ways we need to address it. One is we have to be places that welcome all speech, that welcome all viewpoints, that encourage it, that find ways to talk to each other in a classroom and in a dormitory and on the campus in ways that are civil, but that invite all viewpoints. And that's important. And I think people think that at least some places haven't done that well enough. I think we need to do everything we can to try to adapt and use the tools that are available to us now to make the high-quality education of the University of California available to as many people as possible.
You visited all the campuses, right?
No.
Oh,
No.
okay. Well,
No.
I'm not going to ask you which ones you didn't, which child is not the favorite.
I'll tell you what, I'll say a word about that. I have been to Berkeley, so be careful. This is not the first time I've transitioned into a presidency, and so I have some understanding of how you do this. And I had a 100-day plan, and visiting every campus, and spending time with students, with faculty, et cetera, and it was all going to be done in that first 3+ months. I got a call in the late in July. I was to start August 1, that told me that UCLA had just had $584 million in grant funding frozen, suspended. So I came early and started work a couple of days early. A week later, we got a notice from the Department of Justice. They wanted $1 billion plus $200 million in an additional fund, and a 27-page voluntary resolution agreement with a whole bunch of changes. That was my honeymoon, the beginning of my honeymoon in California, but it also kind of changed how I spent my time early on. I hate to say it, but the 100-day plan that I'd worked on so carefully got tossed out the window. And I spent my time, I left being a lawyer a long time ago, and I had to spend my time with more lawyers than that I would normally like to. So I'm now getting around. I was
trying to get away from you all, but here I am.
I'm now getting a chance to get to more of our campuses, and I've been to most of them now, but I don't want anybody to feel slighted, so I need to round that out.
Absolutely. Look, I want to get back to the UCLA issue and the funding threads later, but the reason I asked you if you visited all the campuses, when you walk on the campuses that you've been to and spent time, whether it's in the quad or in the classrooms, do you feel like it is a place that they are all places where ideas can be freely expressed? Do you feel like it's welcoming and that any group has any reason to feel like perhaps they would be less able to participate freely with their ideas? Or do you feel like, no, this is a place where, it feels as good, comfortable, supportive, and free as ever in terms of supporting that exchange?
Yeah, I see that
feel?
at our campuses, and so the experiences I've had have been reassuring in that sense.
Because
But
in
there's
social
always more
media,
we
sometimes
can
they
do.
say that is not the case, but that's not your experience on the campuses.
Say that again?
In social media
Oh.
and some reporting, right, there are those who say, hey, that's not what's happening on the ground.
Right,
That's why I was
and we
curious
see
what
some of
yours-
that in polling too, and I'm certain that there are some examples of that. But it's one of the things I think that we need to commit ourselves to and make sure that everybody understands that these are places where there's the pursuit of truth is at the bottom of what we do. Mm-hmm. And people have to understand that we encourage all ideas in that pursuit.
Do you feel like you have the system and policies in place now as they are to handle the situation currently? Or do you feel like, do you have new ideas for supporting?
I think
that
we're
kind of
always working on this. I think we've worked on it for decades and decades. I mean, I think we worked on it in the 60s at Berkeley and at other places. We worked on it when I was in school after that. We'll always have to be working at this, but that's what universities do.
Right. And you have the long view. Before being a young man, of course, you certainly remember a lot
Right.
about the history. I want to get to your honeymoon, as you called it, and what happened then with the notice from the federal government of the investigation and over anti-Semitism at UCLA, and therefore the threats on funding. The courts have, of course, paused a lot of the cuts that were threatened, but just with that kind of scrutiny and uncertainty, how threatened is not just UCLA, but UC's funding and research ecosystem right now that depends so much on those grants that were on the table and on the chopping block?
Yeah. If you could tell me the answer to how much of a threat we're under, you might be the president. This would be a good idea. I think it's unknown at this time. I mean, it's been a sort of unprecedented attack on certain kinds of research and other elements of the university. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if there's change in the offing. What I know is that the Congress right now, and I hope they pass the appropriations bills before midnight tomorrow and don't shut down the government. Mm-hmm. But what we've seen now, despite the proposals from the administration, mm-hmm. is relatively flat funding for the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, the Department of Energy, which funds the national labs. So in a normal year, we wouldn't be celebrating flat funding. But this year, flat funding looks pretty good if there's a proposal to cut it in half. One of the other things that Congress has done, which I'm heartened by, is with regard to indirect cost recovery, the funds that the federal government provides alongside of a grant for a specific research project that helps support the underlying fixed costs that make that possible, mm-hmm. reinvested in laboratories and in talent and that kind of thing. And they have said that the negotiated fixed costs can't be arbitrarily lowered, which is a great thing. There was a proposal from the administration at one point to reduce them to 15% across the board, which is far less than the actual costs that are incurred.
Even if those cuts have not all materialized, and even if the cuts aren't permanent, I wonder what does it do to sort of your long-term planning process, just that the threats are there? Does it do damage in some real ways? And are we seeing some of that already?
Well, people are anxious and people are worried about it. I certainly don't blame them. But we've been at this for 157 years at the University of California. I think we're going to be at it for at least another 157 years. I don't know why I picked that arbitrary cutoff, so let's keep going beyond another 157. But I am concerned. I am clearly taking this very seriously and working hard at protecting the University of California and making sure that our students and our faculty still thrive. But I'm optimistic about the long game. I'm optimistic that people will recognize, as they have for generations, the incredible value and necessity of these kinds of institutions. And so I am optimistic. And we are planning all the time for next year, the year after, and the years after that.
You have to almost, right? I mean, looking ahead, but in terms of the hiring, for example, has that been paused due to certain doubts about what might happen next or whether the next shoe will drop? Or are there things that can be felt already?
We have imposed some restraints on hiring, but they weren't directly related to the federal government. I mean, these are just budgetary issues in general. And so,
Like postdocs or, teaching assistants. I suppose that's a different pot that we're talking about. But I just think that when you are planning, if you feel as though you may lose partial funding from this end, is there any way to beef up the other end? And I'm thinking of perhaps collaborations, new partnerships, philanthropy, or other sources that perhaps could be tapped into more deeply.
yeah. We've had a lot of discussions with our partners in Sacramento about this. There's a bond proposal for a $23 billion bond to support research in California on the chance that the federal government will not continue to support the kind of research that has driven health and innovation in California and the country, that the state would step up and do it. And so we're involved in a number of those kinds of discussions. Everybody's thinking about different contingencies, how we would respond. But I'm confident. I was just in Sacramento 2 days ago for the day, talking to the governor and legislative leaders. I am so confident that they understand what needs to be done to support the University of California and other educational institutions in the state, I left those visits being even more optimistic than I was when I went.
All right, this is where I'm going to give you a chance to brag a little bit about all of UC's accomplishments and impact. I'm sure everybody in this room knows just how great of the impact has been, the research, the work that's come out of this university system that has really benefited our society, our state, our country, the world. But to those who are perhaps watching us from afar, what would you tell them about UC? What specifics do you want to call their attention to in terms of the impact the system has had?
So I'll give you the one thing that I've already tried on people from far away. And that was when I was in Sweden last month. I went to Stockholm for Nobel Week. And the reason I did it was because of the 6 American Nobel Prize winners this year. 5 of them were from the University of California. And what that means at Berkeley is they had to have another parking sign put up that says reserved for Nobel Prize winners. But
I was going to ask you, do you, with your office, get a parking spot, or is that just
no,
with Nobel laureates?
Only Nobel. It would shock everyone if I got a Nobel Prize.
Okay. So that's the pecking order. Okay, I get it.
But that's such a phenomenal achievement. And I want to ask those people who are responding to the polls that say the University of California is about like other state universities. They must think, well, everybody gets these Nobel Prizes all the time. I think if most state universities in the country, if they had one Nobelist, that would be on the welcome sign to the campus.
How many do you
But this
have?
makes 75.
Oh, my goodness.
In the history of the University of California, 75 Nobel Prizes. Now, if anyone fact checks this, there are only 74 winners because one person won the Nobel twice. So anyway, this is unparalleled. The University of California is the largest research university in the world, meaning it receives the most funding for research, it has the most grants, it always is cited at #1 in the world in patents, in intellectual...
CRISPR,
What's
gene
that?
editing, CRISPR, right?
I mean, absolutely. You can go down the list. It's one of the things... It's one of the things that troubles me the most right now about some of the political discussion is if you understand the history since World War II, what's happened in this country, and the University of California is the exemplar. I mean, if you had to pick the gold standard for this, it would be UC. But this compact now we're talking about compacts in other ways, but this compact between the federal government and research universities in this country built the largest engine of innovation and knowledge creation that the world has ever seen. And it has driven change in the economy, from CRISPR, the internet, AI, to changes in healthcare, which are incredible. That's something I think, it used to be bipartisan, always. It was the NIH, I remember during George W. Bush's term, there was an effort to double the budget of NIH. And it was supported on both sides of the aisle.
There was a time, yeah. You mentioned the internet. I think we'll have to give that one to Al Gore.
Yeah.
Look, you made a strong case for why UC needs to be nourished, protected, and advance in all ways. But I want to bring this back to the federal government, which does have UC under sort of the microscope right now with funding on the line. And they've made data requests, compliance demands, oversight tied to funding. And I'm wondering, in that context, have you thought about what would be your non-negotiables?
Have I thought about them? Absolutely.
Can you share them?
With you tonight? No.
With your lawyer friends?
No. What? So, I'll tell you this. It won't be as specific as you want, but we have said since day one, we did August 9th when we received the resolution agreement. First, we can't pay this money. This would devastate the University of California. Second, we're not going to compromise on our independence, our governance, our mission, and our academic freedom. And so we're happy to sit down and talk. And I just talked to our faculty senate about this yesterday. And I'm pleased that we have very positive conversations about this, that they have confidence that we are going to stand by that. We are not going to compromise on these areas. Since we said we would be willing to sit down and talk, will we talk to the government about allegations of anti-Semitism at our campus? Absolutely. We want to make sure that we've eradicated anti-Semitism, and it has no existence on the campus. We'll talk to the federal government about this, and if there are things we need to address, we will address them. But we're not going to compromise on those values that underlie the University of California.
Sometimes those decisions can be difficult, and I wonder if there might be times when you would consider, how do I protect the students who are under my charge and care? Has that been threatened yet in terms of the talks that have been ongoing in the?
The one thing that matters more to every university president and chancellor that I have known is ensuring the safety of the people on their campus community, the students foremost, who are typically younger, entrusted to us by their families, but to protect the safety of everybody in those communities is number one priority. It's something I talk with the chancellors about frequently, something we reflect back on incidents here or at other places where we perhaps could have done a better job, but that's always at the top of the list.
And this past week, I think we saw some protests over the situation in Minneapolis, but there were a lot of some of the violence that we've seen at the ICE enforcement. And some of those have reached campuses. And I wonder, how do you think about, if a volatile situation reaches campus, what would you want everybody to know in terms of how to handle that?
There's a system in place in the state and legislation about this, which we have implemented, that provides, assures our students, our campus community, that we provide notice to them. And so this is something that everybody in the state is taking seriously.
All right. I want to turn our attention to something else that's under the microscope, if you will. Federal officials have been talking a lot about wanting more transparency on admissions. And there are California families who feel that way as well. But in terms of the federal piece, how diversity goals are being met and whether testing should be a part of it. As you know, one Republican senator is just now calling for investigations on student preparedness in math, looking at math scores at elite universities. I wonder, how concerned are you that UC students today are arriving perhaps less prepared for academic rigor, or do you think they are?
This is a topic, again, we have a committee of the Faculty Senate that deals with this issue every day. And they are in a position to understand much better than somebody in the corner office the level of preparedness of our students. But it's something we work on, and I've been in discussions all week about this with some of our partners in K-12, in the community colleges, the CSU and UC. It's something we're concerned about all the time. And it's not a simple fix that you can do. One of the challenges we have is that there are a large number of California high schools that don't have the resources to offer algebra early enough so that students can progress on a path to have all the math courses in place before college that they might have at a better resourced high school. Well, that's a systemic issue that we need to figure out how to address that as a state. Mm-hmm. This isn't just a UC admissions issue. If we're serious about providing access to all people in all areas without regard to those demographic characteristics I mentioned earlier, then we have to do a better job of making sure that people have access to that before they get to the university.
That's true, and those partnerships certainly make a lot of sense. But I wonder, what can you do at the admissions level, right? By the time someone is 18 and applying to college, that UC San Diego faculty report that showed, I think recently, more students coming in that need remedial math. And when you get to that point, you have consequences on, I think, the classroom for the students and the faculty. So I'm sure you've given this a whole lot of thought about how to support them, how to remedy, other than the investing more in K through 12, which is a long process. But immediately, what can you do?
Yes, and there are ways that we have worked with our incoming students to make sure that as they are taking their regular courses and matriculating, that they get additional support in those areas, like mathematics, where they didn't have the opportunity to beforehand. There was one report out of UCSD, and this is something that the faculty, the Board of Regents, and others are taking seriously.
Mm-hmm. It's hard, I'm sure, where you balance the desire to have the geographic diversity and diversity of students, even from less well-resourced schools, because that is part of your mission, is to uplift everyone, right? But when you look at that and perhaps the additional burden operationally, when you have students who perhaps need more remedial classes and having to offer those, how do you weigh how you juggle that in the admissions process as to who can still come in and succeed with additional support, and whether the process might need to be reconsidered in the criteria?
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
All right. This is a convoluted way of leading up to whether you're considering, or would you consider, bringing back standardized testing?
This is when I said it's not a simple fix or question, I think this is one of the issues that we're thinking about right now. The Faculty Senate is thinking about it. There's a national discussion about this. There's some discussion in Washington about it. All but one or two Ivy League schools have reinstated the requirement that the SAT be offered.
Yeah.
That's something that we're discussing with our faculty, who looks at this and has the sort of closest boots on the ground understanding of this.
Yeah.
But I'm sure this this will continue to be discussed. And in fact, there are new kinds of admissions and assessments being developed in addition to the SAT and the ACT. There's been talk about whether there should be one that is specific to California. I think these are all ideas that we'll discuss in the months ahead.
Okay. So not a clear path yet in terms of whether you would like to see a particular form of standardized testing, if at all, at this point? Still under discussion?
I stick with my last answer.
Thank you very much. That is, a topic that is very difficult, and I wonder if in 2020, when it was eliminated, at the time, there was COVID, of course, and I wonder if the whole COVID impact also, you think, contributed to if there was learning loss that led to less preparedness.
COVID had a lot of impacts, and everybody across the country stopped using standardized tests, and everybody across the country had an impact on the education of students in the pipeline. And we're all sort of, recovering from that and assessing that now.
Across the country, right? I mean, Texas, did you observe that as well?
Sure.
Yeah. That is very difficult because it might take, some say, experts say, it could take a whole generation to recover. Hopefully the work won't take that long. So let me ask you, if you feel, when you look at the curriculum that is offered today, if there are any specific areas that you would want to focus on as something that all kids, whatever their major, needs to be exposed to.
I'm a big fan of the humanities and of literature, of history, of art. I think that it may be increasingly important, especially today, when so many students are going in computer science, so many students are working in tech fields, so much emphasis is on the STEM disciplines and on engineering. It may be more important than ever that we try to ensure that people are exposed to the humanities. At the end of the day, how to lead a good life, how to understand society and culture, political traditions, economic systems. That's really important. And it's interesting to me that there's a bit of a paradox that, at least it seems to me, that I hear some of the same people that are saying, the state should only support, and I'm not talking about California, the state should only support STEM and engineering and business that lead to jobs that we can see. If you want to take philosophy, pay for it on your own. These are some of the same people who are saying, no one understands our civic traditions. They don't understand how our government works. They don't understand the value of democracy. They don't understand our economic system. Well, that's what you get if you eliminate the teaching of philosophy, of political science, of history, of English. So
Your major.
What's that?
Your major.
Your major, political science, your major.
Right.
So my personal view is I'm heartened by some of the discussion around the country about, at least some part of the curriculum dealing with a civics education, dealing with understanding our political system and others. I think that to be a citizen, that's an important basic level of education and understanding that you need to have.
Do you feel like that's actually more important than ever in this day and age of AI?
I do. I do think it's more important than ever. It may be more important for people to think about how I will lead a useful and happy and good life than how to create the next fastest chip. I don't know, but I think it's really important that we continue to provide the opportunity to and emphasize the need for people to, I think, to be exposed to great literature, to understand history, to be exposed to and appreciate creativity in art and music. It's such an important part of being alive. And
Speaking of literature, I do hear you spend entirely way too much time immersing yourself in books. Is that right?
I'm not sure it could be too much time. I did have my staff once gave me a T-shirt that said, "I like books and maybe 3 people."
Wait, which are the 3 people?
I do have this reputation of, another Californian, Charlie Munger, said once that his children, all through the time they were growing up, thought he was a book with legs. So.
What are you reading right now?
Oh, it's embarrassing. Probably about half a dozen books, because this is my way of jumping around a lot, and I don't listen to podcasts, and I don't get my news off of TikTok. So my jumping around is I'm reading *Sapiens* because I didn't read it the first time around. I'm enjoying it. I'm reading Sandy Weil's memoir, because someone I've gotten to know in the last few months since I've been in California, and this gives me an opportunity. He was on Squawk Box yesterday talking about a $120 million gift that he and his wife Joan gave to UC Davis for the veterinary medicine school. So I promise that if he does that again, I'll read another book by him. I'm reading A History of California, and I will continue to do that.
Well, hopefully you'll make a lot more of those deals because your capacity for reading is limitless. So easy, right? Hey, I want to ask you.
What happened to the audience questions?
What? I don't know. I'm waiting for them. I think the folks who had burning questions have left.
Maybe you invite them back in. I didn't hear a question there, actually.
Actually, I think one person did raise an issue. You reminded me. I had forgotten. Oh, Saved by the
Saved by the
questions.
Bell.
Oh, wow. We have a whole lot of them.
Well, I saw them. You weren't watching. I saw them walking around getting them, and I said,
Look at this. There are questions about, I like this one. Where do you believe that the UC system is making progress on the issue of climate change and adaptation?
I do. I think the UC system is one of the leaders in the country in this space. It's been a priority for the system. We've been working on the zero fossil fuel use on the campuses, total renewable vehicles. There are probably other people in the audience that work with me that know these facts better than I do, but it has been a system-wide and a campus-specific priority for years here. I've never seen a place in the country that has done more in this space.
Yeah, very true, I think. Here's another one from the audience. What is your approach to making college more attainable in practice, not theory? And if you don't mind, I'm going to kind of combine that with something I'd been thinking about, and one of the folks who had thoughts who had to leave was asking about the labor negotiations, right? Those costs are going up, union contracts, no doubt the membership is growing. How do you balance fair compensation for the staff, which I'm sure you're seeking to accomplish, with affordability, this piece, and the long-term sustainability?
Well, yeah, you've hit upon the issue, haven't you? I mean, the issue is we need to hold costs down for students, $14,000 in tuition. So the support we get from the state, the support we get from the federal government, from philanthropists, helps us do that and keep college affordable, but still have the workforce that we need to sustain the university. Right. To get to the first part of the question, or someone else's question about how do you do this to increase access? I mean, one of the things is you do the kinds of programs like we have done in California, where 65% of our resident undergraduates aren't paying tuition. But another part of this is education. I am always stunned, as the polls I mentioned earlier, how people don't have as much information as I would like them to have about higher education and about UC in particular. We know from decades of polling data that people overestimate the cost. They underestimate the amount of financial aid that's available. And if you're a first-generation college goer, and so by definition, no one in your family has gone to college before, those are things that you don't necessarily know that there's a sticker price and a discounted real purchase price. So if you're sophisticated about it, you do, if your parents went to college. So we, I think, can do a lot to help educate people at an early level about how college is possible and why you ought to take the kinds of courses you need and progress and care about how you do, because it is going to be possible. I mean, that's one of the great things that the DREAM Acts in California and in other states across the country did, was to say to people that if you're going to a high school in our state and you're sitting next to somebody who was born in this country, but you're an undocumented student, you have the same opportunity when you graduate from high school to go to college and pay in-state tuition. Otherwise, if we're unable to say that, the motivation for somebody to work hard, to try to succeed, is undercut, I think.
Was there something that you did in New York or in Texas that contributed to the expansion of affordability that you might consider implementing here, or ideas or lessons you've learned?
Sure. There were, I've been doing this stuff for my life at different places. We've been doing zero tuition for all students from families below an adjusted gross income of X. Pick the number, it changes from state to state, and you are always trying to grow that number. A focus on debt-free. At the end of the day, what you really want to do, though, is not create a memorable name for a program, or not just say it's free tuition, because we know there are different costs of affordability, cost of attendance. So, and I don't even think debt-free is the real answer at the end of the day, because a minimal level of debt, if that's what somebody chooses to do, is a pretty good investment in a college education. Not the kinds of exorbitant things you read about in the paper that professional students, but the average debt for residents at the University of California is $21,000 for the 4-year degree. So I think the real answer is continuing to think about what the right balance is of affordability, of self-help or of family contribution, of hopefully a minimal level of debt, and providing the rest of the elements that the university provides that are affordable.
Here's a great question again about AI. We touched on this, but someone in the audience wants to know, how do you see AI changing higher ed, teaching, research, and how people work?
So AI is going to change a lot. This is in San Francisco, I'm saying this. I think probably people here know this. So I think it is going to change the way we teach. The classroom experience and the studying experience is going to change the way research is done. It'll change the way we operate. It'll have impacts in our medical operations in particular, and maybe most immediately. Over 50% of the University of California is health and medicine, which often people don't think about, and is a big change from the California Master Plan that Clark Kerr did in 1960. So it's very heavily health science and medicine now. But I think it's going to change each of those things. I do think the University of California needs to be at the forefront of this, though. I mean, AI lives in San Francisco. Right. It lives in California, and we're the home team. And we've been grappling with issues about the ethical development of AI, the power and environmental impacts of AI, how it affects teaching, how it affects research. And we're going to continue to do this, because this is an area where I want us to be leading among universities in America, not watching others. And I think our corporate partners in California and our state partners will feel the same way.
You can really supercharge a lot of the wonderful research that is happening with implementation of AI. But what about balancing students' use of AI, right, with academic integrity? I'm sure that's something you've also thought about in terms of the policy and how to have the framework of, yes, this is here, of course you're going to use it, but here is the proper way. What are your thoughts on that?
It's going to be disruptive. It already is disruptive, and faculty are grappling with this every day. And you can't shut yourself off to it. You have to adapt and figure out how, in a world where AI becomes more and more prevalent, how you're going to do not only your teaching but your testing, and still making sure that students have rich experiences and where they are forced to grapple deeply with issues and come up with their own ideas and be able to advocate for them. But this is pretty new.
Right.
And this is something that some faculty are throwing their hands up, others are more quick to adapt and use it in their experience. But this is something we're all it's a little like when I was a high school student, and it was the first pocket calculator. And it was the most disruptive thing that ever happened. Teachers couldn't decide, could you have a calculator in your math class or not?
I saw a joke, and I'm not even sure it is a joke, of here's an assignment, the student creates it with AI, and the professor grades it using AI. Did the human do any work?
Right.
Raise your hand, a human that did work. So I wonder...
They should be reading literature then at the same time.
Exactly. Not written by AI, but humans, yes? Okay. I wonder if you see new ways of assessing students' work and learning in the classroom. If, for example, a traditional paper may no longer reflect just the students' work, right, with the AI involvement, for example. Could there be more, for example, oral exams or conversations, sort of in the British Oxford style, where you're just having conversations with your professor? What do you imagine it could be like in
all of the
years?
above?
Yeah?
Yeah. All of that is being done now. So, and I think, and there'll be more and more. We're a couple years into this, and people are experimenting with it. We're going to see much more of it. I think it's exciting.
Mm-hmm. What about faculty use? What do you think the guidance should be for faculty?
My guidance for faculty?
Yeah.
It's the last thing I'm going to do is give the faculty guidance.
Right. Right. Already you don't have that parking spot, and then you also can't talk to faculty about this. Okay. Let's see, a couple new ones that are great. All right, we had a time on the clock. Great. If budget pressure requires us to make a choice, is the next marginal dollar of subsidy better invested in the community college or UC system? Why? I suppose this is a great question for the California legislature. But seriously, how would you advocate for UC? Or do you even see it as a competition for dollars?
With the community colleges?
Yeah.
Or other sectors in
That's the
education?
thing with the question.
I suppose there's always a kind of a natural competitiveness, and when you go to Sacramento and you're making your best case for the university, or you go to Washington. In New York, I had 7 community colleges in my university system. I'm a huge believer in them, and the transfer between community colleges in California and CSU and UC is an incredibly important part of our ecosystem in education. I just saw a story the other day about how many students were graduating in 3 years at Berkeley, at UCSD, at UCLA, Santa Barbara. A number of them because they'd been able to take community college credit when they were in high school, or they were able to take AP courses and get credit for it, or in the summer at a community college. I think these are really important things that we should look at and encourage for a lot of reasons. But we have to have I meet with my counterparts, the community college and CSU.
Yep.
It's an important network ecosystem. And so I want, it's a little like my campuses. I love all my children. I want each of these educational sectors to do very well.
You keep saying that, but they always say parents actually have a favorite.
Yeah, don't ask me that question, okay? My kids might actually see this sometime.
How do you see student voices fitting into your decision-making process during your presidency?
Yeah, so first of all, you have to understand, and I know you understand, but so I'm talking rhetorically. You have to understand that the UC is a system. Our headquarters is an office building in Oakland. And in some ways, we're like a holding company. The operating units are 10 campuses across the state where all the students are and where all the faculty are. Now, it's one of the, depending on your point of view and mine, it's one of the negative parts about being in a university system is that you're not bumping into faculty and students every day. In fact, my wife used to tell me in New York when I would come home grumpy that I hadn't seen any students that day. There was a campus about 20 blocks away where I could go just plop down and have lunch with them. So we come up with mechanisms. We have student regents on the Board of Regents. We have representatives of the graduate students and the undergraduates who speak to us then. I meet with the presidents of the campuses, student bodies, and the other students who are elected to advocate for their interests. So there are a lot of mechanisms that have been in place for a long time to get students' representative views at the highest levels in the university.
This is very interesting. I think it speaks to not just something that's happening at UC, but nationwide in colleges. Will you try to address falling enrollment of boys?
Of boys.
Boys. There is a gender disparity in terms of enrollment at colleges, right? More women these days.
Yeah, we have seen that shift over time.
Yeah. Is that something you are addressing?
It's something I hope is reversed, that we don't see a drop-off in interest for boys and men in college. But I think it's part of the general approach to our message of why college is important. And by the way, it doesn't have to be UC. Just to come back, I guess, to the last question you asked. I mean, I think it's a fabulous thing if people are interested in career education. They're interested in a technical skill. I mean, we all have read stories about a dearth of whether it's welders or others, electricians, which is becoming an incredibly sophisticated trade. I think that's a wonderful thing. Not everybody needs to get a 4-year bachelor's degree. So that's one of the reasons I think that we need a healthy ecosystem across the state of all kinds of education. And we may see, I don't know whether we'll see boys, whether this trend will continue or not. I sort of doubt it. I think that I think it'll correct itself.
Yeah, I think I just read an article about a host of CEOs that came out and said that a college degree is no longer necessary. And I wonder what you would tell them if you had them at a dinner or gala about, approaching it in that way, because that could also be where they're investing their money, not in higher education as well, but perhaps in trade, which of course there is a place. But what would you tell people when weighing their own options and what's right for them?
Well, I tend to, when people tell me that, especially very successful people tell me that college isn't important, I ask them where their kids went to college. And typically, it's a really good place.
But it's not important.
Yeah, so I think that's that may be a philosophical view some people hold. And I do believe that for a lot of businesses, and some that we would not have thought of in the same way with the traditional trades, it may not be necessary, and that's great. But even if you are going to have a highly technically skilled job early job, launching your career. I would argue that most people are better off with a grounding of a college degree that you rely on throughout your career. I mean, we're not preparing you for your first job. This isn't a 6-week credential.
Yeah.
We're preparing you for a lifetime of growth and changes and reskilling if necessary. And we're providing you, I hope, with an exposure to the humanities and some thinking about the meaning of life and how to lead a good life. But I think that people lose sight of the fact that a few years ago, everybody said, well, you could just go into coding. You don't have to go to college. Well, I don't know how many of those people are going to go into coding now. So, I mean, there are fads, but college has been around since 1048 in Bologna. And in fact, you might recognize a classroom if you went back to the 11th century. But it has had a staying power because it speaks to something that people crave. Learning, challenging their thinking, learning from other people, building a reservoir of ways to think and to learn throughout life. And that's not going to change. That's who people are. That's going to be really important forever, I think.
I think so. Here's a question, and also thank you. Thank you for keeping the UC Trump administration challenge off the front page of the New York Times. That is a sign of sophisticated leadership. And here's the question. Since the above challenge is number 1, what are challenges number 2 and 3 at the UC system?
Well, yeah, I don't want to, it's challenge number 1. It's it's immediate. It's something we have to deal with right now. You referred to one of them earlier, which I think is a fundamental challenge for us that predated this current administration and will post-date it, and that's how we address this confidence of the people in education. And we've seen this decline in confidence in experts, in other institutions. My concern is that we turn the tide on that with confidence in higher education. Number 3, that's number 2 on my list. Mm-hmm. Number 3 would be how we make sure, we just had a record enrollment this year, 301,000 people, the highest number of people that have ever enrolled in the University of California, and over 200,000 undergraduates. So this is the biggest it's ever been. But still, think about that, 200,000 undergraduates in a state of 40 million. Mm-hmm. Are there ways that we can, without diluting the quality at all, expand the University of California education to more people in the state? Mm-hmm. I think that there are a whole bunch of dimensions to how we do that. One of them is use of technology. One of them is partnering, perhaps with other institutions. But I think one of them is the development of kinds of credentials and certificates that not only can bolt onto a college degree, but can be available to people throughout their careers so that they come back. I want them to come back to their alma mater, not a proprietary institution, or they ought to have a lifelong relationship with us. So I think that's another one. And how we use that technology, and in particular AI, I think is going to be at the top of our list.
So on sort of a related note, here's another viewer question of, if you could create a new major, degree, or educational pathway at UC, what would it be?
Well,
and I just want to mention this question is from Jay and Rosie, who went to UCLA, UCSF, and Cal. Go.
Look, I'm not sure I am interested in creating new majors. This is just one person's perspective. But I am more interested in interdisciplinary work and people having an exposure to a breadth of disciplines. So I think that that's where a lot of the new knowledge comes, is when these disciplines intersect. I mean, it's one of the reasons we're seeing so much fabulous work being done in medicine today, because of the intersection with engineering and information technology, computer science. So my personal interest would be, if I were starting again as an undergraduate, I'd want to have a humanities degree. I would want to have a degree that wasn't just an English degree or a history degree or a philosophy degree, but had the full range of, I think that would be great preparation for a happy life.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, you would be able to write better prompts for the AI.
Exactly. Well, that's what life's all about. That's the meaning of life.
And this audience member wants to know, I'm curious what the relationship is with former UC presidents. We hear a lot about presidential transition of power at the federal level. What does it look like at the UC level? That's very interesting.
I'm still looking for that envelope in my desk drawer that the former president leaves.
Yep,
and
yep.
It like has 3 things, and the third one is not good.
Yeah.
No, personally have a great relationship with Michael Drake, whom I've known for 20 years, who was the immediate past president. I've known Janet Napolitano for almost that long and have a great relationship with her. Fortunately, both of those people live in the area. I have an even longer standing relationship with Mark Yudof, the predecessor right before Janet. So it's good. Mm-hmm. In fact, I like them all. I like all my children, and I like all my predecessors.
And you're sticking with that story.
Yeah.
Okay.
They know a lot, and so I want them on my good side.
All right. Gosh, so many great questions. How many of the Nobel Prize winners came from other countries? How has the impact of restricting foreign students and faculty affected UC?
That's a hugely important point. 37% of American Nobel Prize winners were born in another country. And if you add then first generations on addition to that, it's probably over 50% are either immigrants or first generation. So I'll think about our 5 Nobelists this year. One was from France, one was from Jordan, mm-hmm. One was from Bay Area, but first generation college goer. One was from England, and another one was from California.
And most of them were UC Berkeley.
So all of the,
Sorry, I had to get that in there.
One started at UCSD, got his first degree, then went to UCLA. Mm-hmm. The physics group, we won all 3 Nobel Prizes in physics. And it started with a man named Professor Clark, who came from England, and he built a research team around him, and 2 people joined his team, and they were all at Berkeley at one point, and I think 2 of them went to Santa Barbara.
Mm-hmm. But, to this audience member's point, who wanted to point out, thankfully, Texas, thank you, for this, Texas just restricted H-1B visas today, right?
This is another area where I think people should read history a little more. And the whole growth of this incredible engine of innovation that came from this post-World War II compact was built in large part with immigrants who came to this country for opportunity and did fabulously well, and we and the world did fabulously well mm-hmm. because of them. So I'm a big supporter. One of the worst things that happened to Harvard was cutting them off from SEVIS and international students. I'm a big supporter of making sure that we encourage people to come here. It's the best kind of soft power diplomacy that we have, is to educate people in the United States. And it's also a way that we attract the talent from around the world who wants to live and work here. So it's not just Nobel Prize winners. Mm-hmm. It's, if you looked at in Silicon Valley, for instance, the number of people who were born in another country who are successful here and who've helped build these industries, it's completely irrational to think we would cut that off. And we are resisting all the time the reductions in H-1B visas, among other international programs that are restricted.
Yeah. The clock back there says we have 3 minutes left. If you answer this one quickly, then you get a really fun one. How's that? Years from now, when your time as UC president is over, what would success look like to you?
Yeah, well, I will resist the temptation to talk about the current troubles. But I think, UC has some amazing opportunities right now. I'm a history buff. You might have gotten that idea. And I think when the Board of Regents interviewed me, I told them I'd read The Gold and the Blue and asked how many had. I didn't see a lot of hands go up, but that's Clark Kerr's 2-volume memoirs about his time at the University of California. And Clark Kerr is one of the most remarkable people in the history of higher education, perhaps the most impactful of the 20th century. And part of was imagining what a modern university system looked like. And the principal author of the master plan in 1960. But the master plan actually had an end date. It said 1960 to 1975. And in 1960, there were 15 million people in California. Now there are 40 million people. And he would not recognize the University of California today. So, I don't have delusions of grandeur. I don't think I'm going to be the Clark Kerr of the 21st century. Mm-hmm. But I do think this is a time when we have an opportunity to rethink, with 3 times the population, 3 times the number of campuses, the impact that this institution has that is so different than even it was as a great university in 1960. What I would like to look back and to think is that we thought seriously about what the next decades will need from the University of California, what the next generations will need from us. What can we do that is as important in the 21st century as what Kerr and his board and his colleagues and their supporters in Sacramento did in the middle part of the 20th century. That's amorphous enough that you can't come back and interview me later and trip me up. But I think that's if you think about what an ambitious idea would be for what our work ought to be today, to me that's what it is. It's a changed world, and we need to think about whether it's AI, whether it's online education, whether it's the changes in requirements for the workforce. We need to take advantage of this moment and set the stage for the decades ahead of us.
And on that note, we are out of time. We conclude our program. Thank you very much, President Milliken.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.